The scent of garlic and rosemary always meant Mark was almost home. Tonight, it was overshadowed by a sweet, cloying fragrance, and the menu for dinner was about to change forever. The scent of garlic and rosemary always meant Mark was almost home. It was our little ritual. I'd start cooking his favorite, a slow-roasted chicken with root vegetables, so the whole house would smell like a warm hug when he walked through the door. It was my way of washing the city off him, of replacing the stale office air and the grime of the subway with the smell of our home. Tonight the chicken was perfect, its skin a crispy golden brown, the potatoes glistening with herbs. I'd even opened a bottle of the good red wine, the one we saved for small victories. His team had landed a big account this week, and he'd been working late every night to close it. I was proud of him. I missed him. The key turned in the lock at exactly 7:42 p.m., later than usual but not unheard of. "Honey, I'm home," he called out, his voice a little strained, the way it got when he was exhausted. "In the kitchen," I called back, smiling as I turned the flame off under the green beans. I heard his briefcase drop with a heavy thud, the rustle of his coat being hung up. Then his arms were around my waist from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Smells incredible, Sarah," he murmured into my hair, his lips brushing my temple. I leaned back into his embrace, closing my eyes, ready to feel that familiar sense of peace, of rightness. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. It wasn't his usual scent of clean laundry, faint deodorant, and the crisp paper smell of his office. Overriding all of that was something else, a sweet, cloying fragrance that didn't belong. It was floral and fruity, aggressive in its femininity. Coconut, I thought, and maybe hibiscus? It was so strong, it was like he'd bathed in it. My smile faltered. I pulled away just enough to look at him. "Tough day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. My heart had started a nervous, fluttery beat against my ribs. "You have no idea," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright, almost manic. The client was a nightmare. We were stuck in the boardroom until just now. He loosened his tie, his gaze flicking around the kitchen, anywhere but directly at me. That's when it hit me. I knew that smell. I'd smelled it before, a few weeks ago, when his new assistant had leaned over my desk at the company holiday party to ask where the restroom was. Chloe. A bubbly, ambitious 20-something with hair down to her waist and a laugh that was just a little too loud. She'd used that exact shampoo. I remember thinking it was a bit much for a professional setting. Now, that same scent was clinging to my husband, woven into the fibers of his suit, emanating from the warmth of his skin. It was in his hair. My mind started racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they were in a small, enclosed space together, like an elevator. Maybe she'd accidentally spilled something on him. But the scent was too intimate. It smelled like he'd just stepped out of her shower, like he'd held her close, her freshly washed hair pressed against his chest, his face. The image flashed in my mind, so vivid and unwelcome it made me feel sick. "Everything okay?" he asked, finally meeting my eyes. He was frowning slightly, a little crease of concern between his brows. "You look pale." "Just tired," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Long day for me, too." The lie tasted like poison. I turned back to the stove, my hands trembling as I picked up a serving spoon. My appetite had completely vanished. The beautiful meal I'd prepared with so much love now seemed like a cruel joke. "Well, let's eat. I'm starving," he said, pulling out a chair at our small kitchen table. He was acting completely normal. He was talking about his day, about spreadsheets and profit margins, about some idiot in accounting who couldn't get his numbers right. And all I could do was nod and hum in all the right places, while the ghost of another woman sat between us. Her scent was a third person at our table, laughing at me. I placed the platter of chicken in the center of the table. I dished out the roasted potatoes and the carrots, the steam rising up to meet my face. but when I picked up his plate, my hands froze. I looked at the perfectly arranged meal, a plate full of warmth and care and history. Our history. And then I looked at him, laughing at some story he was telling, completely oblivious to the storm raging inside me. He wasn't the man I cooked for. The man I cooked for wouldn't bring the scent of another woman into our home. Slowly, deliberately, I set his plate down in his spot. I then took my own plate, a much smaller portion than I'd intended, and sat down. I picked up my fork. He paused mid-sentence, looking at me. "Aren't you going to serve yourself more?" "I'm not very hungry," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I took a bite of a potato. It tasted like cardboard. I watched him as he served himself a huge portion, piling his plate high. He ate with gusto, praising my cooking, telling me how much he'd been looking forward to this all day. Each word of praise was a knife twisting in my gut. I didn't say another word. I just ate in silence, the clinking of his silverware against the ceramic plate echoing the frantic pounding of my heart. The meal was over in 15 minutes. He pushed his chair back, patting his stomach. "That was amazing, babe, truly. I'm going to go hop in the shower. I feel gross from the city." I just nodded, my eyes fixed on a spot on the tablecloth. He came over, leaned down to kiss me, but I flinched, turning my head slightly so his lips landed on my cheek. He hesitated for a second, then straightened up and walked out of the kitchen and toward our bedroom. A moment later, I heard the shower turn on, the rush of water, a sudden, violent sound in our quiet apartment. I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of our phantom dinner, the plates looking obscene and wrong. His plate was nearly clean. Mine was still half full. But his smell, her smell, still lingered in the air. He was washing it off. He was trying to erase the evidence. But it was too late. I'd already smelled it. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones like a shard of ice, that this wasn't the first time. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of panic and denial, suddenly went completely clear. I needed to know. I needed proof. His phone was on the nightstand. He always left it there when he showered. My body moved without my permission, my feet carrying me silently down the hall. The sound of the water grew louder, masking my footsteps. There it was, lying face up on the dark wood of the nightstand. As I reached for it, my hand shaking so hard I could barely control my fingers, the screen lit up. A new message had just arrived. It was from a contact named Chloe W., and the preview was just 6 words. 6 words that stopped my breath and shattered my entire world into a million pieces. The 6 words glowed on the screen, burning themselves onto my retinas. I can't wait to do that again. A simple sentence. A death sentence. The breath I was holding escaped in a ragged, silent gasp. The room tilted violently, and I had to put a hand against the wall to steady myself. The rhythmic drumming of the shower water suddenly sounded like war drums, counting down the seconds until my life officially ended. My blood ran cold, then hot, a nauseating wave of adrenaline and ice. He wasn't just tired from work. He was tired from her. The smell wasn't an accident in an elevator. It was the scent of betrayal, of intimacy, of hours spent in her arms, in her bed, in her shower. My thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. He used the same passcode for everything. Our anniversary, 0814. The irony was so bitter, it felt like I'd swallowed acid. I tapped it in. The phone unlocked. Her message was at the top of the list, a picture of her smiling brightly next to her name. I clicked on it. And I fell. I fell through weeks and weeks of my own oblivious life, reading a story that had been happening right under my nose. It started innocently enough. "Thanks for the help with the presentation, Mark. You're a lifesaver." His reply, "Anytime, Chloe. You're a quick learner." Then it shifted. "You looked great in that blue dress today." He'd written a month ago. Her reply was a winking emoji. "Trying to get your attention." It escalated quickly from there. Pet names. Handsome. gorgeous. Inside jokes about people at the office. Complaints about his workload, his commute, his wife. Sarah's making that dry chicken again tonight. Pray for me. He texted last Tuesday. I remembered that night. I'd tried a new recipe. He told me it was delicious. He lied. My stomach churned. I kept scrolling, my fingers moving mechanically. There were photos, a selfie of her pouting at her desk, which he'd replied to with fire emojis, a picture of their lunches, 2 plates side by side at a restaurant I'd wanted to try for my birthday. He'd told me it was booked solid for months. He'd taken her instead. Then I found the messages from today. I can't focus. Still thinking about last night. She'd sent this morning. His reply, "Me too. Tonight can't come soon enough. The client meeting is the perfect excuse." So the big account, the late nights, the stress, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed alibi for an affair. The last few messages before the one I saw pop up were a detailed plan. He would leave the office at 5, go to her apartment. She lived just 10 minutes from his work, and he would be home by 8, claiming the meeting ran late. It was all there, in black and white, a blueprint of my destruction. Suddenly, the water stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where the sound of my world collapsing echoed. He'd be out in a minute. My mind, which had been a fog of pain, snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. I couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not yet. With frantic, precise movements, I scrolled up, screenshotting everything. The pet names, the lies about me, the plans for their trysts, the photos. I screenshotted it all. I opened a new message, sent the entire library of damning evidence to my own number, and then I deleted the message thread from my phone to his. I then went into his sent messages and deleted the one he'd sent to me. As far as his phone was concerned, the conversation never happened. I wiped the screen with the sleeve of my sweater, placed it face down on the nightstand, exactly as I'd found it. I walked out of the bedroom, my feet silent on the hardwood floor. I was a ghost in my own home. I returned to the kitchen and stood over the sink, gripping the cold marble countertop until my knuckles turned white. I could hear him moving around in the bedroom, the soft thud of a drawer closing, the rustle of clothes. I felt nothing. The pain was so vast, so all-consuming, that it had become a strange, numb emptiness. I was hollowed out. He walked into the kitchen, a towel slung low on his hips, his hair damp and curling at the ends. He was smiling, looking refreshed and relaxed. He looked like the man I had loved for 8 years. He looked like a complete stranger. "Ah, much better," he said, stretching his arms over his head. "Scrubbed the whole day off me." I didn't turn around. I just stared down at the drain, at the few stray bits of rosemary and garlic from dinner, erasing the evidence. "You were so quiet during dinner," he said, his voice closer now. He came up behind me, placing his hands on my shoulders. I didn't flinch this time. I remained perfectly still, a statue carved from ice. "Everything really okay, babe?" I finally turned to face him, forcing my lips into a small, tight smile. I let my eyes drift over his clean, scrubbed face, his bare chest, the little drops of water still clinging to his skin. He was a beautiful liar. "Yes," I said, my voice even and calm, a stranger's voice. "Everything's fine. I was just thinking." "About what?" he asked, his thumbs gently rubbing my shoulders. His touch felt like a brand. I looked past him, at the leftover chicken sitting on the counter, at the plates still on the table. A plan, cold and clear and sharp as a shard of glass, began to form in the hollow space inside me. My smile widened just a fraction. "I was just thinking about what to make for your dinner tomorrow," I said, my voice a soft, deliberate purr. "I want it to be special, something you'll never forget." Mark's face relaxed into a satisfied grin. He was so easy to please, so predictable. He bought my lie completely, interpreting my strange mood as nothing more than a wife's quiet contemplation. "Anything you make is special, Sarah," he said, pulling me into a hug. I let myself be held, a mannequin in his arms, my body rigid. He smelled clean now, of our soap, our water, our home. But underneath it all, I could still faintly trace the ghost of coconut and hibiscus. It was burned into my memory. He let me go and padded back to the bedroom to get dressed. The moment he was out of sight, my mask of composure crumbled. I leaned against the counter, my legs shaking, and finally looked down at my own phone. The notifications were there, dozens of them, a gallery of my husband's betrayal, delivered neatly into the palm of my hand. I opened the first image, a screenshot of his message calling my cooking dry. I scrolled to the next, a picture of him and Chloe clinking glasses over lunch. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Crying felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Crying was for victims. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a reckoning. That night, I lay in our bed and pretended to be asleep. Mark climbed in beside me, warm and content, and draped an arm over my waist. His hand rested on my hip, a casual, proprietary gesture that suddenly felt suffocating. I lay there, ramrod straight, my breathing slow and even, a perfect imitation of sleep. I listened to his breathing deepen, listened as the man who had shared my life for 8 years drifted off into a peaceful, dreamless slumber just inches away from me, completely unaware that the woman beside him was gone, replaced by a stranger filled with cold, meticulous rage. The next morning was a masterclass in performance. I woke up before him, made the coffee just how he liked it, and packed his lunch. I even hummed a little tune as I spread mayonnaise on his sandwich. When he came into the kitchen, nodding his tie, I smiled at him. "Morning, handsome," I said, using the same pet name Chloe used in her texts. He didn't even notice. He just grinned, kissed my forehead, and thanked me for the coffee. Every action, every word was a piece of a carefully constructed facade. I was playing the part of the devoted wife, and I was playing it for my life. "So, what's this unforgettable dinner you're making tonight?" he asked, grabbing his briefcase. "It's a surprise," I said, my smile unwavering. "Just make sure you're home on time. 7 o'clock sharp?" "Wouldn't miss it for the world," he said, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the suffocating silence. My day was a flurry of calculated activity. First, I called my sister. "Hey, can you do me a huge favor?" I asked, my voice cheerful. "Can I transfer some money to you? Just need to move it out of the joint account for a bit. It's for Mark's anniversary gift, and I don't want him to see the charge." My sister, bless her trusting heart, agreed without hesitation. In 5 minutes, I had moved 70% of our shared savings into her account. It wasn't stealing, it was severance. Next, I packed. Not a suitcase. That was too obvious. I used 2 large, sturdy moving boxes I had in the basement. I took my mother's jewelry, my grandmother's photo albums, the little porcelain bird Mark had bought me on our first anniversary. I packed the things that were mine, the pieces of my life that predated him. I packed my important documents, my passport, my birth certificate, my degree. Then I went through his closet. I took the expensive watch I'd bought him for his 30th birthday and put it in the box. I took the first edition book I'd spent months hunting down for him. Anything of value that I had given him, I took back. They weren't gifts anymore. They were collateral. My final stop was the grocery store. I walked the aisles in a daze, picking out the ingredients for his unforgettable meal. I bought the most expensive cut of steak, fresh asparagus, a bottle of champagne, the really good stuff. I even bought a decadent chocolate lava cake for dessert. It was going to be a feast, a last supper. As I was checking out, I saw a display of shampoos near the registers. A bright pink bottle caught my eye. Tropical hibiscus and coconut, the label read. I picked it up, unscrewed the cap, and took a deep sniff. The cloying, sweet scent filled my lungs. I added it to my cart. Back home, I began to cook. I moved with a strange, detached precision, following the recipe for the steak sauce as if it were a sacred text. The house slowly filled with the aroma of searing meat and melting butter. It was a domestic scene straight out of a magazine. The perfect wife preparing the perfect meal for her loving husband. But as I stirred the sauce, I felt a tremor in my hand. The rage that had been simmering just below the surface was starting to bubble up, hot and dangerous. I needed to do something, anything, to keep it from boiling over before the final act. I walked into our master bathroom, the pink bottle of shampoo in my hand. I turned on the shower, the water steaming up the mirrors. I undressed, stepped inside, and unscrewed the cap. I poured a ridiculously large amount into my palm and began to work it into my hair, creating a mountain of sweet-smelling lather. I scrubbed and scrubbed until my scalp tingled, until the scent of coconut and hibiscus was so overpowering it made my eyes water. I was baptizing myself in the smell of my own humiliation. I was claiming it, making it mine. When I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around my dripping hair, I looked at my reflection in the foggy mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hard, her mouth set in a thin, determined line. She looked ready for war, and as the clock on the wall ticked closer to 7, I knew that's exactly what she was going to get. I finished setting the table just as the clock struck 6:55 p.m. I didn't use our everyday dishes. I used the fine china we'd received as a wedding gift, the plates with the delicate silver trim that we'd only ever used on anniversaries. I lit candles, 2 tall white tapers that cast a soft, flickering glow across the room. I dimmed the lights. The champagne was chilling in a silver bucket. The steaks were resting under foil. The asparagus was perfectly crisp tender. From the outside, it was the picture of romance, an intimate dinner for 2. But the air was thick with something other than the scent of good food. It was thick with unspoken words and finality. My hair was still damp, wrapped in a towel. I let it down, the chemically sweet smell of coconut and hibiscus blooming around me like a toxic cloud. I took a deep breath, inhaling her scent. My scent. It no longer made me feel sick. It felt like armor. I had put on a simple black dress, the one he always said made me look sophisticated. Tonight, it felt like funeral attire, my own. The key turned in the lock at 7:01 p.m. He was a minute late. I felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. "Wow," he said, stepping into the dining room. He stopped short, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "Sarah, what is all this? Did I forget something? Is it an anniversary of our first date or something?" "No," I said, my voice smooth as silk. I walked toward him, my hips swaying just a little. "I just wanted to do something special for you. You've been working so hard." I reached up and straightened his tie, letting my fingers brush against his neck. He leaned into my touch, a contented sigh escaping his lips. He hadn't noticed my hair, or if he had, he hadn't processed it yet. "It's incredible," he said, his eyes scanning the beautifully set table, the champagne, the candles. "You're incredible." He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head and offered my cheek, just as I had the night before. This time he paused, his brow furrowed, his nose twitched. "Is that a new shampoo?" he asked, a strange note of confusion in his voice. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Do you like it?" I asked, pulling back and shaking my head slightly, letting the scented strands of my hair move through the air between us. "I just picked it up today. Thought I'd try something new." He stared at me, his expression unreadable. I could see the gears turning in his head, the faint flicker of alarm in his eyes. He was connecting the dots. The scent was too specific, too recent in his memory. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "It's nice," he finally choked out, his voice a little hoarse. "Fruity." "Let's eat," I said, turning away from him and walking to the table. "I'm starving." The dinner was excruciating. I played the perfect hostess, laughing at his stories about work, asking him about his day, filling a champagne glass every time it was half empty. He, on the other hand, was a mess. He was jumpy and agitated, his eyes darting around the room, constantly looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. He barely touched his steak. He kept complimenting the food in a voice that was too loud, too forced. "This is the best steak I've ever had, Sarah. Really, the best." I just smiled and nodded, taking small, delicate bites of my own food. Inside, I was a coiled spring, a predator watching its prey. I was enjoying this. I was enjoying his discomfort, his dawning panic. This was just the appetizer for the main course of his destruction. After I cleared the main course plates, I brought out the chocolate lava cakes. I'd warmed them so the center was perfectly molten. "Dessert," I announced, placing one in front of him. He stared at it as if it were a bomb. "Sarah, can we just talk for a second?" He started, pushing the cake away. "You've been acting different." "Different how?" I asked, my voice laced with false innocence as I took a spoonful of my own cake. The rich, dark chocolate was a welcome bitterness on my tongue. "I don't know," he floundered, running a hand through his hair. "The dinner, the shampoo, it just feels like something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong, Mark," I said, putting my spoon down and looking him directly in the eyes. My gaze was steady, unrelenting. In fact, for the first time in a long time, everything is perfectly clear. I reached for my purse, which I had placed on the empty chair beside me. I pulled out my phone. "I actually have something for you, a little dessert of my own." I unlocked the screen and opened the photo gallery. I turned the phone around and slid it across the polished wood of the table. It stopped directly in front of his plate. On the screen was the first screenshot, Chloe's smiling face next to her message. "I can't wait to do that again." His face went ashen. All the color drained away, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. He looked from the phone to my face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No sound came out. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and watched him. I watched the man I had built a life with crumble before my very eyes. He slowly reached for the phone, his hand shaking violently, and began to scroll. With each swipe, a fresh wave of horror washed over his face as he saw his own words, his own lies, his secret life laid bare under the romantic candlelight. He scrolled for what felt like an eternity. When he finally reached the end, he dropped the phone on the table as if it had burned him. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. "Sarah, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Can you explain the lunches? The pet names? Can you explain telling her my cooking is dry while telling me it's delicious? Can you explain using a client meeting as an excuse to go to her apartment? Please explain it to me. I have all night." He just stared at me, speechless. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hiss of the candles. I let him stew in it, let the full weight of what he had done and what he had lost crash down upon him. Finally, I stood up. "You know," I said, walking around the table to stand behind him, "I realized something today. We have so much. This beautiful home, a life we built together." I let my hand rest on his shoulder. He flinched. "It seems a shame to just throw it all away over a silly mistake." A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. Pathetic, desperate hope. "Sarah, I am so sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I love you. Only you." "I know, baby," I cooed, my voice dripping with false sympathy. I leaned down, my lips close to his ear, my hibiscus-scented hair brushing against his cheek. "And that's why I think I know a way we can fix this, a way to make sure it never, ever happens again." He looked up at me, his face a mask of desperate relief, ready to accept any penance I offered. And that's when I smiled my widest, most terrifying smile of the night. But it's going to require a very big sacrifice from both of us. His eyes were wide and pleading, like a dog waiting for a command. "Anything, Sarah," he breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush of relief. "I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll cut off all contact. We can go to therapy. Anything to fix this." "Shh," I whispered, my fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw. He shivered at my touch. "It's simpler than that. No therapy, no quitting. That's all so messy. I have a cleaner solution." I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the bottle of champagne. I topped off his glass, then my own. "To new beginnings," I said, raising my glass. He fumbled for his hand still shaking, and clinked it against mine. He took a long, desperate gulp. "See," I began, circling the table slowly like a shark. "The problem isn't just you, Mark. The problem is temptation. The problem is her, Chloe." I said her name, and he flinched as if I'd struck him. "As long as she's there, this will always be a possibility, a what if. We can't build a new foundation on such shaky ground. We have to remove the problem, permanently." He stared at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "You mean, you want me to get her fired?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Sarah, I don't know if I can do that. She hasn't done anything wrong professionally. There could be lawsuits." I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Oh, Mark, you still think so small. Fired? That's not permanent. She'd just get another job. She might even stay in the city. You might run into her. No, that's not good enough." I stopped in front of him and leaned down, placing my hands on the table, my face just inches from his. The candlelight danced in my eyes, and I knew I must have looked insane. I felt it. A glorious, liberating insanity. "I have all the proof I need," I said, tapping my phone. "Screenshots of your entire relationship, your inappropriate conversations, your pet names, the clear evidence that you were sleeping with your direct subordinate. I wonder what your HR department would think of that. Or your boss, who is a personal friend of Chloe's father, isn't he? I wonder what would happen to that big promotion you've been working so hard for." The last bit of color drained from his face. He looked like he was going to be sick. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Wouldn't I?" I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You brought the scent of another woman into my home. You lied to my face. You made a mockery of our marriage, of me. Don't you dare tell me what I will or won't do." I stood up straight. "Here is my solution, our sacrifice. Tomorrow morning you are going to walk into your office. You are going to take the blame for everything. You are going to confess to HR that you made inappropriate advances toward Chloe. You will say that you pursued her relentlessly, that you abused your position of power, and that she is a completely innocent victim in all of this. You will resign, effective immediately, citing gross misconduct. You will ruin your own reputation to save hers." He was gaping at me, his mind reeling. "But my career, my reputation. I'll be blacklisted. I'll never work in this city again." "Exactly," I said, my smile returning. "That's your sacrifice. And mine. My sacrifice is that I will stay with the man who did all of this. I will forgive the unforgivable. I will stand by the husband who humiliated himself and destroyed his own career. I will be a saint. And you will owe me. For the rest of your life, you will be indebted to me. Every day you wake up next to me, you will remember that I hold the power to destroy you utterly, but I chose not to. You will be mine. Completely and totally. No more secrets. No more lies." He stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He was trapped. If he refused, I would send the screenshots, and he and Chloe would both go down in flames. He would lose his job anyway, and he would lose me. My way, he only lost his career. He got to keep the illusion of his marriage, and his precious Chloe got to walk away unscathed, a tragic heroine in the story he would write for her. I knew which one he would choose. He was selfish, but he was also a coward. He finally slumped in his chair, a broken man. "Okay," he whispered, the single word of surrender hanging in the air. "Okay, Sarah, I'll do it." I nodded, satisfied. Good. I picked up my purse and my phone. I'm going to go stay with my sister for a few days. I need some space to process. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. I'll expect to see your letter of resignation by noon tomorrow. Send me a copy. I walked to the front door, not looking back at him. I could feel his eyes on me, full of shock and fear and a dawning, horrified respect. I didn't go to my sister's. I drove 2 hours to a nice hotel in a city where no one knew my name. The boxes I had packed were in the trunk of my car. The money was safe in my sister's account. The next morning at 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from Mark. Attached was a PDF of his resignation letter on company letterhead. It was a work of art, full of self-flagellation and praise for Chloe's professionalism and integrity. He had done it. He had detonated his own life to save himself from a slightly bigger explosion. I sat there looking at the letter on my phone screen. I thought about going back. I thought about playing the part of the forgiving wife, of holding this power over him for the rest of our miserable lives together. I could do it. I could make him my puppet. But as I sat in that sterile, anonymous hotel room, the faint smell of coconut and hibiscus finally fading from my hair, I realized something. I didn't want him. I didn't want the broken man, the empty marriage, the life built on blackmail. Ruining his career wasn't the victory. Getting him to ruin it himself, to confess his own weakness and sacrifice his ambition for a woman he'd been screwing for a few months, that was the point. He had shown me exactly who he was. I took a deep breath. I forwarded his resignation email, along with the entire library of screenshots, to every single person in his company's executive leadership, the entire HR department, and for good measure, to Chloe's father. Then I opened a new text message to Mark. My fingers flew across the screen. Just so you know, I sent your confession to everyone, and the real story, too. Looks like your sacrifice was for nothing. By the way, the locks are being changed tomorrow. My lawyer will be in touch. I hit send. Then I blocked his number, turned my phone off, and dropped it into the hotel room's trash can. I stood up and looked out the window at the new, unfamiliar city. The weight of the last 48 hours of the last 8 years lifted off my shoulders. I had served him his last meal. I had burned his world to the ground. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I was completely, gloriously, and finally alone. And I was free.